it's hard to believe that it was a year ago today that the rain started and continued, and then came the flooding. And so many people really haven't been able to get their lives back where they wanted, where they had hoped. Dr. Nick joins us this morning with more. It's frustrating for so many.
Yes. I was reading in The Advocate some kind of, I think, close to actual figures, about 165,000 people in East Baton Rouge.
Oof.
About 50,000 in Livingston, and about 40,000 in Ascension. Over 500,000 throughout the entire area.
Right, over 100,000 homes,
homes,
but 500,000 people.
500,000 people.
That's incredible.
Affected, and it really has been. I mean, I know the pace has been frustrating in terms
Certainly.
of rebuilding and slow, but we have to again realize the disaster that this really was, and how we're about progress, and there has been some progress. It's slow. Very slow.
That's what I was going to say. For people who are still fighting their insurance companies,
Fighting insurance.
still trying to get a contractor, we're ripped off by one or two contractors. For those people that just think, how am I still in this minutia? What are some skills to help them adjust?
And to add to that, to make sure that we're clearest about why PTSD in and of itself already makes us more hyper aroused and irritable, and even at times feeling like we're hostile. And so it's important that people understand some of that is natural, but then compound that with the fact that they're fighting with FEMA, fighting with insurance companies, just trying to get a legitimate contractor that will be consistent, not knocking contractors. I'm sure there are great ones out there, but again, it's slow. And some people have had some corrupt dealings.
It's been horrible.
Because of the opportunity that comes after a tragedy.
Yeah.
So it has been a difficult year, but I do think that people are managing to support each other.
Yes.
I just saw the other day there's a flood-related PTSD support group on Facebook.
Oh, so that's a great tool for people
and
to go
there's
to.
part of the treatment group. Just to go online and talk about it, and maybe ask people for how are you managing,
Right, or were you able to get the insurance companies to bend a little, or FEMA, and share those resources, right, and maybe those strategies.
Yes, and the strategies, yes, and then again to help people understand the emotional and psychological dimension, because again we're having tons of PTSD-related behaviors, nightmares, flashbacks. I mean, do you realize, Whitney, and people see a boat and their anxiety goes up. They see
rain.
All the rain we've had this summer has created that kind of association and the tendency to want to avoid it.
Sure.
And I know that this makes sense to people, but again, to people who are experiencing it, they have to kind of almost accept that a little bit, and then say, okay, that's where the cognitive behavioral helps so much. To think, oh my God, every time it rains, it's going to flood. Well, I know that's hard for people to hear, but it's really not true.
Right.
But you tell somebody like that's having a flashback, and they want to react hostile and irritated because it's not what they're feeling.
Right.
And so the real struggle is to move beyond the feeling to let's put that on trial. Not every rain is going to cause a flood, or when we see people that we were in the boat with, we don't need to have flashbacks.
Right.
They're used as support system instead of avoiding, because we tend to avoid.
Of course. You and I were discussing venting and how constructive that can be for people, and so for groups and people who've gone through this together, there's a lot of sharing that can be beneficial. But you also said letting steam off.
Yeah, I just had this thought this morning when I was reading some of the stories and the expressions on Facebook. And again, to be clear, I believe that venting is very important. Right. The problem is when you think of it, think of letting steam out of the pot. Okay? You take it off to let the steam out. That's that's venting. Okay?
Right.
All right. Why not always also be thinking, why not turn the stove down? Why not bring the heat of the moment down? Meaning that we look for options instead of simply just venting. What might I do in place of it? How might I help myself move on to see the world still as a good place? How might I see that natural disasters doesn't mean that life is bad, or that I can't get through this, or that there's not some life beyond? In fact, I've heard many people say their homes are looking great now that they've knocked out walls. I'm not, but that's a reframe. That's a reframe of the opportunity that comes from crisis.
Yes.
We don't always see it in the moment, but then after. And one other thing I might just mention too, Whitney, which is kind of minor. I work with a number of people that have gone through it, and some people have moved back into their homes and they're not yet finished.
You're
and
right.
they have struggled with making that decision. My experience with people who've done it has been that it's been a good idea.
Yeah.
They're back in their natural surroundings. Even have you experienced that?
Yes.
With
you know,
some of
Tanya
your
Dillon
interviews?
said that she's back with her neighbors. She's back at her home. Now, the problem, and she didn't say this, but it crossed my mind, of you're back in it and there's still things to do, and
Yes.
you're always surrounded with, you know, I should really paint that wall. I really need to go buy that stove. I really should go find that flooring to match this. If you're surrounded always by things that need to be done, is that constructive?
What I think makes it humanly challenging, but also opportunistic, is it helps us to realize it's about the process.
Okay.
To trust the process. My sister's moving into a new home, and she says, "Oh my God!" I said, "Susan, slow down. Trust the process. It's not going to be done overnight." This is really important for people who've experienced the flooding. It is a process. And I agree with you that you go in and you look at it and you want to you were probably somewhat that way when you moved into your home.
Of course.
But I think you also slowed down and said, let it kind of happen.
Yeah, there were boxes over there for a while.
Yeah, let it kind of happen. And there is something to be said for enjoying the process. And people will say, how can I do that? Well, we just simply accept that this is what's happened.
And there were some of us who got together in like Tanya's instance and decided, you know what we should really do? We should have a paint party for her. And let's all just do it one day, and let's knock it out and make it as fun as possible. And that's one less thing on her to-do list. So that would be helpful.
And that's the power of people. Mm-hmm. That's the power of group and the power of a support system that comes together. There's nothing like the neighborliness, which I have seen tons of.
I know.
Tons of. So it's been a year, but it's, everybody just take deep breaths, lots of deep breathing, relaxation techniques.
Okay.
A lot of acceptance, a lot of putting some of this stuff on trial up here and saying, that's not really true. The sun's out.
Great. Thanks,
Good to see
Dr.
you,
Nick.
Whitney.
You too. More of Weekends with Whitney after this.